June 25th, 1876, 3:15 in the afternoon. Wooden Leg, an 18-year-old Cheyenne warrior, crouches behind a ridge overlooking the Little Bighorn River in Montana Territory. His heart pounds, not from fear, from excitement. Below him, in the valley, sits the largest gathering of native tribes in American history, 10,000 Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho. Women cooking, children playing, warriors preparing for the Sundance ceremony. Peaceful. Then he hears it. Gunshots from the south. Women screaming, children running. The U.S. 7th Cavalry is attacking the camp. Within seconds, Wooden Leg grabs his rifle and sprints toward his horse. Around him, 2,000 warriors do the same. They've been expecting this, preparing for this. They charge up the ridge toward Medicine Tail Coulee. And there, at the top of the hill, they see them. 210 soldiers of the 7th Cavalry, led by Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer. The man who said, and I quote, "I could whip all the Indians on the continent with the 7th Cavalry alone." In exactly 45 minutes, not one of those soldiers would be left standing. But this wasn't luck. This wasn't a massacre of innocents. This was the result of arrogance meeting reality. This was what happens when you underestimate your enemy. You're listening to Legends of the Frontier. I'm your host, and today we're telling you the true story of the Battle of Little Bighorn. Not the Hollywood version, not the Custer's Last Stand mythology. The real story, from the perspective of the warriors who were actually there. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. And if this story grabs you, hit that like button. It helps us keep telling these forgotten histories. Now let's go back to the beginning, because to understand what happened on that hill, you need to understand how we got there. 1868, 8 years before Little Bighorn. The U.S. government signs the Treaty of Fort Laramie with the Lakota Nation, led by Red Cloud. The treaty is simple. The Black Hills of Dakota Territory belong to the Lakota forever. The U.S. Army will stay out. White settlers will stay out. In exchange, the Lakota agreed to stop attacking wagon trains on the Bozeman Trail, Red Cloud signs, the U.S. government signs. For 6 years, the peace holds. Then, in 1874, everything changes. Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer leads an expedition into the Black Hills. His mission, officially, to scout locations for a military fort. His real mission, gold. And he finds it. When news spreads that there's gold in the Black Hills, thousands of white prospectors flood into Lakota territory. The U.S. government does nothing to stop them. Actually, that's not true. They do something. They demand the Lakota sell the Black Hills. The Lakota refuse. So the U.S. government issues an ultimatum in December 1875. All Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho tribes must report to designated reservations by January 31st, 1876. Any who refuse will be considered hostile and subject to military action. January 31st, in the middle of winter, when moving an entire village through blizzards and sub-zero temperatures would kill women, children, and elders. Sitting Bull's response? Come and get us. This is where Wooden Leg's story begins. His real name in Cheyenne was Kum Okwivyokta, which translates to Wooden Leg. In 1876, he was 18 years old, young, strong, eager to prove himself as a warrior. He lived with his family in a northern Cheyenne village that camped alongside the Lakota under Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse. Wooden Leg wasn't political. He wasn't interested in treaties or negotiations with the U.S. government. He just wanted to hunt buffalo, protect his family, and earn honor as a warrior. But in 1876, you didn't get to be neutral. The U.S. Army declared that anyone not on a reservation was an enemy. So Wooden Leg became an enemy. Years later, when Wooden Leg was an old man living on a reservation, he told his story to a researcher named Thomas Marcus. That story became one of the most detailed Native American accounts of Little Bighorn ever recorded. Everything I'm about to tell you comes from Wooden Leg's own words. This isn't speculation. This isn't guesswork. This is what actually happened. Spring 1876, native tribes from across the northern plains begin gathering in Montana Territory. Lakota bands under Sitting Bull, Crazy Horse, and Gall. Cheyenne bands, including Wooden Leg's village, Arapaho warriors, even some Santee Sioux who had fled Minnesota after the Dakota War of 1862. They camp along the Little Bighorn River in a valley the Lakota call Greasy Grass. Why here? 3 reasons. First, water. The Little Bighorn River runs clean and cold. Second, grass. The valley has lush grazing for thousands of horses. Third, buffalo. Massive herds pass through this area in late spring. By mid-June, the village stretches for 3 miles along the river. Conservative estimates put the population at 7,000 to 10,000 people. At least 2,000 of them are warriors. This is the largest gathering of Plains Indians in American history. And it's not a war party. It's families, elders, children, women drying meat, men hunting. They're not hiding. They're not planning an attack on the U.S. Army. They're just living, refusing to surrender their freedom. The U.S. Army sees this differently. To them, this is a hostile force that must be destroyed. Let's talk about George Armstrong Custer, born in Ohio in 1839, graduated from West Point in 1861, dead last in his class. During the Civil War, he earned a reputation as a bold, aggressive cavalry commander. He also earned a reputation for recklessness, sacrificing his men for glory. By war's end, he was a brevet major general at age 25. After the war, he was demoted to lieutenant colonel in the regular army. He hated it. Custer was obsessed with fame, with glory, with proving he was the greatest cavalry officer in America. In 1876, he saw an opportunity. The U.S. Army planned a 3-pronged campaign to crush the hostile tribes in Montana Territory. General Alfred Terry would lead one column from the east. Colonel John Gibbon would lead another from the west. General George Crook would lead a third from the south. The plan was to trap the natives between these 3 forces and force their surrender. Custer commanded the 7th Cavalry Regiment under General Terry, about 600 men divided into 12 companies. On June 22nd, Terry gave Custer clear orders: scout the Rosebud River, locate the native village, wait for Terry and Gibbon to arrive, then attack together with overwhelming force. Custer had other plans. See, Custer didn't want to share glory with Terry and Gibbon. He wanted the headlines to read, "Custer defeats Sitting Bull," not "U.S. Army defeats Sitting Bull." So when his scouts found the massive village on June 25th, Custer made a decision that would cost him everything. He would attack immediately, alone. His scouts, including several Crow warriors who knew the area, warned him. They told him the village was enormous, that there were thousands of warriors. One Crow scout named Bloody Knife told Custer, "We will find enough Sioux to keep us fighting for 2 or 3 days." Custer's response? He laughed. He actually laughed, and then he said, "I guess we'll get through them in 1 day." On the morning of June 25, 1876, George Armstrong Custer divided his regiment into 4 groups. Captain Frederick Benteen with 3 companies would scout to the south. Major Marcus Reno with 3 companies would attack the village from the south. Captain Thomas McDougall with 1 company would guard the supply train. And Custer himself would take 5 companies, 210 men, and attack from the north. His plan was to hit the village from 2 directions simultaneously, causing panic and forcing a quick surrender. There was just one problem. Custer had no idea how many warriors were waiting for him. At 3 p.m. on June 25th, Major Reno attacked the southern end of the village. The battle had begun, and Wooden Leg was about to live through the most important day of his life. Let me tell you what Wooden Leg was doing when the battle started. Sleeping. He'd been out late the night before at a social dance. Young warriors showing off for young women. The usual. Around noon on June 25th, he woke up and went to the river to water his horse. The day was hot, clear, perfect weather. The village was buzzing with normal activity. Women cooking, children playing, old men sitting in the shade telling stories. Wooden Leg walked back to his lodge, thinking about going hunting later. Then he heard it. Gunshots from the south end of the camp. A rider galloped through, shouting, "Soldiers are coming! They're attacking the village!" Within seconds, everything changed. Women grabbed children and ran toward the hills. Old men grabbed rifles and ran toward the sound of gunfire. Warriors sprinted to their horses. Wooden Leg ran to his family's lodge. His father handed him a rifle and ammunition. His mother was already packing essential items in case they had to flee. Wooden Leg didn't wait. He grabbed his best horse, a fast pinto, and rode toward the southern end of the village where Major Reno's soldiers were attacking. By the time he got there, hundreds of warriors had already engaged Reno's troops. Now let's be clear about what happened with Reno's attack. He charged the southern end of the village with about 140 men. He expected panic. He expected natives to scatter. Instead, warriors immediately counterattacked. Reno's men dismounted and formed a skirmish line in the trees along the river. For about 20 minutes, they held their position. Then the warriors flanked them. Reno panicked and ordered a retreat. His men ran back across the river, losing cohesion, losing discipline. Warriors shot them as they ran. Reno lost 40 men in that retreat, killed or wounded. The survivors took refuge on a bluff across the river and dug in. But here's what's important. While Reno was fighting at the south end of the village, Custer was riding north along the east side of the valley, looking for a place to attack. And Wooden Leg was about to ride straight into the fight of his life. After Reno retreated, warriors at the south end of the village realized the fight was over there. But then someone shouted, "More soldiers! To the north!" Wooden Leg turned his horse and rode north through the village. All around him, warriors were doing the same. Hundreds of them, Lakota, Cheyenne, Arapaho, young warriors like Wooden Leg, veteran fighters like Crazy Horse and Gall. They crossed the river and charged up the ridge toward Medicine Tail Coulee. In his memoir, Wooden Leg describes this moment. "I rode up the gulch, following many other warriors. The gulch became full of Indians. It seemed the whole world was coming to help us." The whole world. 2,000 warriors all converging on the same point, and at the top of that hill, George Armstrong Custer and 210 men of the 7th Cavalry. Now, before we continue, I need you to understand something. This was not a fair fight. Custer had 210 men. The warriors had 2,000, but that's not the full story. In 1876, the U.S. cavalry used single-shot Springfield carbines. Fire one round, eject the shell, load a new cartridge, fire again. Many warriors, including Wooden Leg, carried repeating rifles. Winchester 1866, Henry rifles, Spencer repeaters. These rifles could fire 15 rounds before reloading. The technological advantage everyone assumes the cavalry had? It didn't exist. In fact, the warriors were better armed. Add to that, the warriors knew the terrain. The cavalry didn't. The warriors had been training to fight on horseback since childhood. Most cavalry soldiers were recent recruits who could barely ride. And most importantly, the warriors were fighting for their families. Custer's men were fighting for a man who cared more about glory than their lives. Wooden Leg reached the top of the ridge, and he saw them. Soldiers in blue uniforms, horses, guidon flags. They were formed up on a hilltop now called Custer Hill. They hadn't attacked yet. They were just sitting there, looking down at the village. Maybe Custer realized at that moment how badly he'd miscalculated. Maybe he saw the thousands of lodges and finally understood. We'll never know, because at that moment the warriors attacked. The battle lasted approximately 45 minutes. I'm going to walk you through it in detail, using Wooden Leg's account and those of other native warriors who were there. This won't be clean. It won't be heroic. War never is. The warriors didn't charge in one massive wave. They surrounded Custer's position on three sides, east, south, and west. The only direction left open was north, which led to even worse terrain. Warriors on horseback circled Custer's position, firing from moving targets. This is a tactic called circling that Plains warriors had perfected over generations of warfare. Ride hard, fire, circle back, reload while moving, fire again. The cavalry, dismounted in a defensive position, couldn't hit moving targets. Wooden Leg describes riding through heavy gunfire. Bullets were whizzing everywhere. I could hear them cutting through the air. I thought surely I would be killed, but I kept riding and shooting. He shot at soldiers with his rifle. When he ran out of ammunition, he used his bow. Other warriors did the same. Close-range bow shots could pierce cavalry uniforms and even light body armor. Within the first 15 minutes of the battle, Custer's defensive position began to collapse. Warriors infiltrated the perimeter. Hand-to-hand fighting broke out. Cavalry horses, not trained for this level of chaos, panicked and bolted. Soldiers on foot had no chance. Crazy Horse led a group of Oglala Lakota warriors in a direct charge up the south side of the hill. Gall, a Hunkpapa Lakota war chief, attacked from the east. Cheyenne warriors, including Wooden Leg, attacked from the west. Custer's men were completely surrounded. There's a moment Wooden Leg describes that I want you to really visualize. He's riding through the battle. Smoke from gunfire fills the air. Wounded horses are screaming, men are shouting, and then he sees a soldier separated from his unit trying to reload his rifle. The soldier sees Wooden Leg. Their eyes meet. The soldier raises his rifle. Wooden Leg is faster. He shoots first. The soldier falls. Wooden Leg was 18 years old. That soldier might have been 19, 20, maybe 25. Someone's son, maybe someone's brother or father. War doesn't care. In that moment, it was kill or be killed. And both sides knew it. By 4 p.m., 1 hour after the battle started, Custer's position was overrun. Small groups of soldiers tried to make a run for it. None succeeded. Warriors cut them down as they ran. George Armstrong Custer died on that hill. We know he was shot twice, once in the chest, once in the head. Whether he was killed in battle or shot after he was already down is debated. What's not debated is this: every single one of the 210 men in Custer's battalion died. Not one survived, not one surrendered, not one escaped. Wooden Leg describes finding Custer's body after the fighting stopped. The soldiers had been stripped of their uniforms and weapons by warriors. This wasn't desecration, this was standard practice. Warriors took what was useful: guns, ammunition, clothing, horses. Custer's body was not mutilated like many others. Some historians think warriors who knew him from previous encounters recognized him and left him alone out of respect. Others think they simply didn't know who he was. Wooden Leg walked through the battlefield in a daze. Dead soldiers everywhere, dead horses, wounded warriors being carried back to the village, the smell of gunpowder and blood. He later wrote, "I felt sorry for the soldiers. They fought bravely, but they came to kill us, to drive us from our land. We had to defend ourselves." By late afternoon on June 25th, the battle was over. Custer's entire battalion wiped out. Reno and Benteen's forces, still dug in on the bluff to the south, would survive, but only because warriors didn't press the attack the next day. Why didn't they? Because scouts reported more soldiers coming. General Terry's column was approaching. Sitting Bull made the call: pack up and leave. The village had won the battle, but the war was far from over. The warriors had suffered casualties too. Estimates range from 40 to 100 warriors killed, dozens more wounded. For the families of those men, the victory was hollow. But for a brief moment, the native tribes had done something unprecedented. They had annihilated a U.S. Army regiment. They had proven that when united, when defending their homes, they were unbeatable. The problem was, This victory guaranteed their destruction. The US government would not tolerate this. The US Army would not forget this, and the American public, when they heard the news, would demand vengeance. News of Custer's defeat reached the American public on July 4, 1876, Independence Day, the nation's centennial celebration. Newspapers across the country printed headlines. Notice how the narrative shifted immediately. When the US Army attacked a peaceful village, it was called battle. When native warriors defended themselves and won, it was called massacre. Custer, who had led his men into a suicidal attack out of arrogance, became a martyr, a hero. The newspapers didn't mention that he divided his regiment. They didn't mention that he ignored scouts' warnings. They didn't mention that he attacked a village full of women and children. All they reported was, "Savages killed our boys." American public opinion turned viciously anti-native. Congress authorized more funding for the army, more soldiers, more equipment, more campaigns. The message was clear. The Indian problem would be solved permanently. After Little Bighorn, the large native encampment broke up. They knew staying together made them a target. Tribes scattered across Montana territory. The US Army hunted them relentlessly. In September 1876, General Crook's forces attacked a Lakota village at Slim Buttes. In November, Colonel Ranald Mackenzie destroyed a Cheyenne village led by Dull Knife. In January 1877, Colonel Nelson Miles attacked Crazy Horse's camp in the Battle of Wolf Mountain. One by one, the tribes were ground down. Not by glorious battles, by starvation. The US Army deliberately targeted buffalo herds. By 1880, the buffalo that had sustained plains tribes for centuries were nearly extinct. Millions of buffalo reduced to fewer than 1,000. Without buffalo, tribes couldn't survive on the plains. They had no choice but to surrender and move to reservations. In May 1877, Crazy Horse surrendered at Fort Robinson, Nebraska. 4 months later, he was killed by soldiers while allegedly trying to escape. In July 1881, Sitting Bull surrendered at Fort Buford, Montana. He spent years in exile in Canada before returning. In December 1890, Sitting Bull was killed by Indian police during an arrest. The great chiefs who won at Little Bighorn all ended up dead or imprisoned. And what about Wooden Leg? After Little Bighorn, he continued fighting with the Cheyenne for several more years. In 1879, he surrendered and was sent to a reservation. He converted to Christianity, changed his name to John Wooden Leg, became a Baptist minister, married, had children. He lived to see the world transformed completely. He saw railroads cross the plains. He saw telegraph lines. He saw automobiles. He saw airplanes. The buffalo were gone. The nomadic life was gone. His children grew up speaking English, going to American schools, living on a reservation. In 1907, Wooden Leg visited the Little Bighorn battlefield. It had been turned into a national monument. There were markers where Custer's men had fallen. There were no markers for the warriors who died defending their families. In the 1920s, Wooden Leg told his story to a researcher named Thomas Marquis. He described the battle in detail. He talked about what it felt like to be 18 years old and fighting for survival. He didn't glorify the violence. He didn't celebrate the deaths of the soldiers. He just told the truth. We did what we had to do. They came to kill us. We defended ourselves. Wooden Leg died in 1940 at the age of 82. He's buried at the Little Bighorn Battlefield National Monument, not far from where he fought 64 years earlier. So what do we take away from the Battle of Little Bighorn? Here's what it's not. It's not a story about savages massacring innocent soldiers. It's not Custer's last stand, some heroic final defense. It's not a tale of primitive warriors getting lucky. Here's what it is. It's the story of what happens when arrogance meets reality. George Armstrong Custer believed he was invincible. He believed native warriors were inferior. He believed 210 men could defeat thousands because he was leading them. He was wrong, and 210 men paid the price for his ego. It's also a story about consequences. The native tribes won the battle, but that victory sealed their fate. After Little Bighorn, the US government poured unlimited resources into destroying native resistance. Within 5 years, every major chief had surrendered or been killed. Within 15 years, the buffalo were extinct. Within 20 years, all Plains tribes were confined to reservations. The victory at Little Bighorn was Pyrrhic. They won the battle but lost the war. But here's what Little Bighorn proves beyond any doubt. When native warriors were united, when they were fighting for their families, when they were defending their homeland, they were absolutely equal to any military force in the world. The tactical skill demonstrated that day was extraordinary. The coordination of 2,000 warriors from multiple tribes, with no unified command structure, executing a perfect encirclement. That's military genius. West Point teaches Crazy Horse's tactics to this day. Narrator, and maybe most importantly, Little Bighorn gave us Wooden Leg's testimony, his voice, his perspective. For too long, American history was written exclusively by white historians using white sources. Native voices were ignored, dismissed, erased. Wooden Leg's memoir is one of the most detailed Native American accounts of any 19th century battle. It's invaluable, it's irreplaceable, and it reminds us that history has multiple sides. On June 25, 1876, 2,000 native warriors proved that the US cavalry was not invincible. They proved that when you underestimate your enemy, you pay with your life. They proved that arrogance is a fatal weakness, and they proved that sometimes, just sometimes, the underdog wins. If you made it this far, thank you. Seriously, this is the history they don't teach in schools. These are the voices that deserve to be heard. Do me a favor, hit that like button. It helps more people find these stories. Subscribe to Legends of the Frontier so you don't miss the next one, and drop a comment below. Tell me, what part of Wooden Leg's story hit you the hardest? I read every single comment. Next episode, we're covering the Battle of Adobe Walls. 28 buffalo hunters versus 700 Comanche warriors. You think you know how that ends? Think again. I'll see you there.